Hello, good evening. It is Monday, the 20th of December, and I am continuing to read Bliss, Afterlife. This was written 15 years ago, and I am now on chapter 30. This is the story about Bliss, who left her body at 95, and basically it describes how she felt. Chapter 30. Bliss continues her journey. I've been a guide for a long time. I enjoyed this task immensely because it was the step between leaving the physical existence and entering the spiritual dimension, which was every time a curious event. Of course, I understood what was going on. I had been at this place many times, but it still was always fascinating to me how the individual passing differed. Make this a bit quieter, I think. I hope this is audible. How the individual passing was different for everyone. All spirits returning to the soul world feel the light and the easiness, as we are all bodiless. But what they feel or see in their thoughts is very different. It is what you expect that will be there. Once the elders are met and the return to the complete soul is experienced, understanding is easier. But the individual impression is individual. The initial impression is individual. I spent a lot of time thinking. It is the most natural thing to do here, like breathing, which is no longer necessary. I was always impressed by courage in my last existence. Courage is a state of mind like willpower. It is at the core of one's being. It can appear unexpectedly and instinctively. Such precious characteristics. Of course, only the ignorance with which we enter our physical existence allows this courage. If we knew that reincarnation exists and that the state of being after death is often infinitely easier than the life lived in a body, with all the needs and vulnerability this entails, many would succumb to the pressures of daily life and choose the spirit world. Although there seems to be something in the physical existence here which seems particularly attractive. Maybe that's why we are so many now on Earth, in physical existence. Souls just love returning to this planet. Even with a choice of planets available, Earth was a particularly wonderful place. The variety was more interesting than anywhere. We are made to live through all physical experiences. We choose ourselves, as souls, to make this journey, again and again. Only when we are back here are we reminded of the rules of the game. We can laugh about it then, but laughing is much harder when we are compelled to live life. In whatever society we are born into, somehow we as the human race never manage to understand that there is an evolution happening. I spent much of my last years reading about all the ideas and visions many people had and have written about. I was glad to have come across the wonderful energy which Reiki brings. The energy which is always there and is understood by many, but so far not many enough to make it something useful to humanity as a whole. What a relief, though, to be allowed to return to spend one's existence in blissful contemplation. I thought of my daughters. I could be with them at an instance. For a short period of time, I had started to feel less involved in their lives. This always happens, although time here is on a different level than on the physical earth. I had enjoyed meeting the souls of Sophie's parents recently. The connection their daughter had with Susan and Holly was lovely and a great development. This made me smile. Things usually work out if there are enough positive vibes moving it along. Chapter 31. Alexei starts again. Alexei had spent a long time contemplating his previous life. He went back further into previous incarnations because he really needed to heal himself. He spent long times with his soulmates, and at his favorite place, which was a small lake in the countryside, sunny and warm. That was one thing he enjoyed in most incarnation, fishing and watching the fly bob up and down with birds singing and the quiet anticipation of a fish at the end of a hook, all happening through the power of his thoughts, in a real but not physical way. He felt he needed to go back again soon. In Earth terms, it had only been a few months that he had died. It felt here different. The time of passing has a different concept here, but he knew that the return was quicker than most souls would choose. He will consult a little later with his elders and his group and present his idea of his next incarnation. He definitely did not want to have loads of money-making desires this time. He felt he really needed to understand how to live a good life, a life where he needed to bless the little things to find happiness, where he could give to the earth rather than taking all the time, and follow a true purpose, feeling abundant, not needy. He was pondering over the process of reincarnations. He could not imagine how he could have had any idea of how this works whilst he was still in a physical body. Really, considering his many incarnations, he was never a spiritual person in any of them. He was always very down to earth. His last life was all about making money, and his thrills or emotions of happiness were always related to some financial gain. He would have found it difficult to even describe exactly the park which backed onto his back wall in the last big 8-bedroom house he inhabited, or be able to describe the things his last girlfriend liked to eat. When he was an Irish mother of 8 in the incarnation before he was Alex, he remembered that he had spent all his time in misery. Of course, now he knew why he had chosen this path. He had rested for centuries before he chose that life. He had really messed up before the Irish saga. He'd been a slave trader. He really needed to understand human misery. But during that life, he never tried to be soul conscious. He never was somehow. For this reason, he wanted to return. In a rural setting. Sufficient. Not poor, but not rich either. He would be a female again, and he wanted to be born into a family with a small holding. Maybe enough to eat, but no big privileges. He would be the only child, but the family would be close. Mother, father, grandmother, and granddaughter, maybe in China. This would be a challenging country to grow up in. It is the 21st century, and China is a fast-moving society. He will have to consult and prepare. Chapter 32. Rosie and Isabella. Isabella let herself into the house, her refuge. She thought of it like this sometimes. It was quiet. She was back from the night shift at the hospital and everyone was still asleep. That was one of the best things here. Childcare just took care of itself. There was always somebody at home to look after the children. It was remarkably unorganized but functioning. Susan was here most of the time. She had an office next to the kitchen, and whoever came home usually started in the kitchen. This week she was on the night shift and she knew her 3 children were looked after. Usually they were with Rosie's children, or if not, then Rosie would know where they are. It had been a stroke of luck that she and Rosie, as well as the children, got on so well. Isabella made herself a cup of tea and a sandwich and sat down tiredly at the big table. She looked through the paper, which was lying on the table. It was a local paper, and Natalie's death was reported in a small column. Young girl commits suicide in local women's refuge. It made this place sound so institutionalized. It could not be further from the truth. Somehow Susan managed to create a real home here for everyone who wants to come here and fit in and look at this as a retreat. Of course, it was not anywhere luxurious, but the company and conversation was always really interesting. Isabella had never really had a close girlfriend, not since primary school anyway. Her parents always moved around so much. She never had enough time to develop relationships. She realized that she always had this needy feeling. She always felt she needed to please everyone. She could not remember when exactly she had become aware of being too clingy. Her oldest, Alice, was born when she was only 16. Her boyfriend Terry did not want her to have an abortion. She somehow felt flattered by that, as if it required gratefulness that he wanted the baby. Well, did he want the baby, or did he just not want her to have a termination? Isabella had no idea what she wanted. She just followed Terry. Looking back, she shook her head about her own innocence and thoughtlessness. As soon as Alice was born, he disappeared. They had been living at Isabella's parents' house in the back bedroom, and when Alice came home from hospital, he had gone. She did not hear from him for 8 years. How the fuck did she get into this life she had led for such a long time? She met Roger in her parents' tennis club. Well, she could not remember when she had last seen them actually playing tennis, but they spent most Fridays and Saturdays in the clubhouse. Roger was actually a friend of her dad's. Well, he was 10 years younger than her dad, but that still made him around almost 30. Isabella was in her 20s, and her daughter Alice was 3.5 years old. Younger guys never wanted to go out with Isabella. Her daughter was a bit of a turn-off. Isabella did not actually care. She loved Alice, and they got on fine at home with her mum and dad. Roger really flattered her. He was a bachelor. Unusual for Isabella. Anyway, he bought her drinks, and they met quite often, and eventually they slept together. Isabella got pregnant straight away. She had not even been sure she liked Roger. He did not need to be told twice. The ring was bought, and she was married 3 months before Matt was born. He was a proud dad, and Geraldine was born 11 months later. She could not remember when Roger started to drink much more than ever before. He was in his 40s, and somehow nothing was good enough for him anymore. He always had a go at Alice in particular. This got worse, and when he hit her about a year ago, Isabella realized that the marriage had been on the rocks for a long time. She never really connected to Roger in the deep sense. She somehow always had the feeling that she was supposed to be grateful that he took her on. She was in her mid-30s now, and the prospect of sharing a place with her friend Rosie really cheered her up. They had quite a brood together, 6 children from 3 to 16. All had such characters. Already a little cynical, Alice had to suffer the most by her stepfather's comments and teasing and taunts. Isabella was still annoyed with herself that she did not open her eyes to how horrible their day-to-day lives had been. Roger was drinking almost all the time, and Isabella had long stopped trying to understand what made him so self-destructive. The last 2 months before she moved out with her children and 3 suitcases with their most precious possessions were so confusing to her. He constantly had a go at her and her children. He started to hit her, and she just packed and left. It was pure luck that she had read an article in the local rag about Susan's refuge. She had simply knocked on the door, and she and her children were taken in. I'll stop here at chapter 32, and shall read chapter 33 tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody. Sleep well on this Monday.